All right, so yesterday we were having some issues implementing the login. And we first configured our course on the server to allow queries to come from 4200, which is where we're hosting our client. Our Angular client is going to be hosted at 4200. And when we posted our login, we did remember to put include the credentials. Right? Notice it was working fine for retrieving data and whatnot, but for logging was failing, and it was because when you include the credentials, you can no longer configure your cross-origin to be asterisk here. You have to be a little more specific. You have to say, well, where exactly this is this authorization, this cookie that I need to remember now. Where's this coming from that they want to authenticate, right? So you need to specify the domain that it's coming from. And also you need to add this additional line that someone had suggested yesterday that we have to access control allow credentials true, right? So those two changes from yesterday, and now login indeed is working. I also went ahead and cleaned up the code a little bit, right? It was getting pretty messy here. So let me just show you what some of the refactoring that I did. If you remember, in here we had a schema, right? We had created a user schema. We had created a model. We had created a service to be able to log in. It was implemented here in the server.js. What else did we have here? We had also to be able to retrieve the current user was here. There was a sample to play around with the session to be able to set or get things from the session. Remember that? So that was all yesterday. So I cleaned it up a bit. And I only left here things that are for configuration purposes. Okay, only configuration. I left it here on the server. So to improve this a little bit, I moved the user schema. I moved it to a dedicated file. Right? So instead of having it in our server.js, it's best practice to implement your specific schemas in their own dedicated file. Okay, so that's what you should do as well. Right? Any schema should live in its own file, and it's exactly the same code we had yesterday, right? Which I just moved it into its own file. Now I also exported the schema. Right, I assigned the schema to module.export so that I can use it outside of this file. Right, I can import it elsewhere, and specifically I'm importing it from another file called user model. User model is requiring the user schema. Notice that it's doing .user schema.server, so it's loading that file in the same directory. Right, it's loading it up. And then it's creating the user model from that schema. So it does exactly the same code we had yesterday, but moved into a separate dedicated file. Make sense? Right? I also moved in here those two, the find all users that we had yesterday, right? I moved it in here. I also implemented a function here that would allow us to actually log in, right? It's pretty much the same we had yesterday, right? It allowed us to find a user by their username and password, right? So it's using find1. Find1 is a kind of like a syntactic sugar of find. It's a convenient method that basically does a find. It does a find, and then it just retrieves the first one in the array. Because remember, find always returns an array of objects, right? All the elements that are but find1 just retrieves the very first one, right? If you're confident that your query matches exactly one, then you can just retrieve that. Everybody okay? Right? And then to be able to use these two functions outside of this class, outside of this module, right? Outside of here, what I did is I created a little map. I created a JSON map, right? Just an object, just a plain old JSON object. And then exported that object. Right? So folks could import, right? They could import this module, and what they would get is references to the local functions. Make sense? Okay. All right. We also had in server.js. In server.js, I also had a couple of other things here. I also had the app.get, app.post, right? Those lived here too. So I moved those away. I moved them and I put them in services, and I made it a dedicated user service server file under a directory of services. So all my services, anything that is dealing with HTTP interaction, right, gets and posts and puts and deletes, right, coming from outside, I put it in here. Here's our URLs, right, that we're listening for. We're listening for incoming gets, get user, incoming posts for a login, right? That's our login that we were playing around yesterday. We also, I think we had this one too, find all users. Here. So these are all our HTTP queries live here. We also have their implementations. These are all the implementations, right? If you remember, find all users. If you remember, it was just using the user model, find all users, and then returning with the list of users. Remember that? Okay, so I just moved it here. It's cleaner, right? We moved it all in dedicated files. To be able to use the user model from within my services, I'm requiring, right? I'm requiring my user model, right? Required. So notice that I'm navigating. I'm going up a directory, then down to models, user, and then user model. Yes? Okay. So I'm using the user model from here from my services. Here I'm retrieving all the users. Here's my login. And here's where we were having trouble yesterday, right? Then somebody pointed out to me that I was doing this wrong, right? I was using this as a function. Remember that? I think it was you who was pointed it out, right? I was doing this, and we fixed it, and somebody pointed out that sessions is a map, obviously, right? So it's a map. So we fixed that. Thank you for that. The other thing we had an error yesterday that I fixed. I mistakenly was using request.send, right? If you remember, yesterday we were getting when the post for the login was going out, it was saying pending, maybe meaning the server was never responding. The server never got to respond to anything, right? It says, why is it pending? What the heck is going on? It's because I have mistakenly used an REQ as opposed to an RES. Using a response to send back a response back to the client. Yes. So make sure you spell these things right and look up and step through the code to figure these things out. What else? Current user. This was correct. Current user basically returns from the session whatever we did put in the session. Right. When we log in, we put the current user that we just found from the credentials. When we find it, we just put them in the session, right? And then here we just return the entire session. We don't have to return the entire session. We could just return the user we just put in the session, just making sure that indeed we did put something in the session. So maybe we can just return that. What else? What else do we have here? That's it. I think that's it. Yeah, so just some refactoring. Right? Just refactor a couple things on the server. But basically, it's the same exact code we had yesterday. Right? So please follow this structure, right, for the server. Right? Put all your data models, your schemas, your data access to a database. Put it in dedicated directories, right? And then dedicated files for the models and the schemas. Everybody okay? Right? And for the services to deal with incoming HTTP requests, gets and puts and deletes and posts and whatnot, put it in a dedicated user.service.server. Okay? One other thing here is notice that these services are using the variable app. Right? Remember, that's Express. That's an instance of the Express library, right, that we had instantiated earlier. Somebody instantiated it. Certainly not here. We're not instantiating it here. Notice that we don't have here an instantiation of Express. Right? Instead, it's still being instantiated here at the server.js. Right? Here's app. Right? So that stayed the same. So somehow we need to pass it right? And somehow we need to pass it along to our user service, right? We need to pass it along. Notice that my export is exporting a function. See that? There's a function. That's a function, right? That takes as argument app. See that? Okay, it's exporting this as a whole function. So somebody is going to import this function, right, and pass it as an argument, right, an instance of the app. See that? Right? And that's exactly what we do here in server. Here's app, and way down below, here's where we are loading. We're requiring our service. There it is, right? And then once we have this, this returns a function, right? This returns a function, and then we pass it, right, to that function. We pass it the app in parentheses. See that? Some folks might find this syntax a little disturbing. So if you prefer, you could maybe assign it to user service, to a local variable, if you prefer, right? And then maybe, that's a function. So user service becomes a function. So that's a function, and then you pass it app. If you prefer that, that's fine, right? Although here now we've just declared a variable that I'm never going to use ever again. So it's kind of a useless local variable that I don't need. That's why I was using the other syntax. Everybody okay? All right, so that's a review of the server side. Let's go back and see a couple of changes I've made to the client. Okay, let's look at this. All right, so yesterday we were playing around with navigating between login and profile and register, right? And we created links to do this, right? Let's see. Let's try to run that. Oops. Let's go here, and is it running? Let me see. Angular npm start. Oops. I think I have it already running somewhere. Oh, it's already running. Oops, what's going on here? Sections component, da-da-da. Oh, I was playing around with sections. Let me fix that just a minute. Section components. Section components. Let me just comment that out for a second. Right, so this is where we were yesterday. We have the course navigator, right? And we also had created logins, register, profile. Okay, all right. I fixed login, right, to just get you going. Now, let's see, we do have a couple of users. Let me see, do we have Mongo here? Where are we? Show DBs, use, which one were we using yesterday? This one, right? Show collections. And now we say db.user.find, and then we can say pretty and see what we have there so far. Right, so we have Alice, we have Bob, we have a couple of users there, right? Right, that were the ones we were playing around with yesterday. Okay, so now the login, I fixed it up. Let me show you what I did for the login. For the login, we have the same HTML as yesterday, so that didn't change. Right, we have the input field. We have with a click event for the button. We had bound the usernames and password fields to these input fields, and then the login button, and then pass the login username and password. Right, so that's the same as yesterday. Let's take a look at the component, though. The component, right, it's almost the same as what we were looking at yesterday. We had the username and password. We had the constructor. And here's the user service that we were using yesterday. And we were using that to do a login, right? We were saying with the username and password, we were creating a local variable user and then passing it along to user service.login. See that? Right, so that's the same as yesterday. We didn't change anything there. If we look at logging, is what we looked at just yesterday. It's just a post, right? Okay, this is what we had yesterday. But what I did add is the following. What I did do is the following. This login, notice that this login is returning whatever this fetch returns, right? This fetch is returning a promise. Yes? It's returning a promise. And so this whole thing returns a promise. And the promise comes back from when the server comes back from that post, right? And that post, if you remember, that post is returning the current user. See that? Is returning the current user. There's the post, right? The login, that's the post. This post, right? It's returning the current user. So here, this u is the actual user coming back, presumably the currently logged in user. Okay. Now, what we want, there's nothing really that we can do with that user, other than maybe validating that the user exists. Right? It could have come back as null, or it could have come back as an error, right? But if we do have a user, notice what I'm doing here. What I'm doing here is I'm going to now programmatically navigate. I want to navigate to the profile page because I have logged in. I'm logged in. I now know who you are, right? I can now navigate to the profile page and then, show you things that are relevant to you because I know who you are now. Okay. Okay. So that's what we're doing here. To do that, to navigate programmatically, we need to inject another service, right, called the router service, right? And you can imagine what the router service does, right? It can manipulate routes, okay? It can change routes, right? It can read routes. It can do all sorts of things with the routes. One of the things that you can do with the route, notice that I assigned it to a local private variable called router, right? One of the things that it can do is it has a function called navigate. Right, navigate, and you can pass it as an argument a path. You can give it an array of paths. Okay, this path here is the same path that we had configured earlier in our routing. Right, remember our routing? Right, in our routing we had declare login, register, profile. See that? Right, profile is, right, isn't that the route? Right? If we go to the profile, where do we go? The profile component. You see that? So this allows me to change the route on the URL, right? And then programmatically navigate after I have confirmation of a successful login. Right? If I have a successful login, I know the current user is in the session. Right? I can now navigate to the profile page, and in the profile component, what do I do in the profile component? Well, in the profile component, if you remember yesterday, the profile component had nothing, right? It just said, profile works. Okay. What we want to do in the profile component is show information relevant to the currently logged in user, the current user, right? And who has the current user? Well, not the client. The client should not maintain any state, right? The server is the one who maintains all the state information, right, of the application. All the data lives on the server. The client is a dumb client. Always has to go back to the server for actual data. Right? Who's the currently logged in user? Ask the server. Okay. So that's exactly what I did. I just like in login, we injected the user service. Yeah. I also injected the same user service to the profile. See that? Right, that's why it's a good idea to make services singletons, right, that encapsulate all data access, right, so that we don't have to recode that, right? We can put it in one place and then reuse it wherever we need it. Right, here we are using it in profile, and then from this profile we're saying this user service and calling current user. The current user does a get, Current user does a get to current user, right? That's this current user here, this current user on the server, right? That what does it do? It looks up in the session for the current user, right? There it is, and then it sends back the current user. On the client, notice that we do need to add credentials include, meaning I want to use the same cookie that I used when I logged in. See that? Otherwise, it won't work. Right? If you don't put this include, the server will think, oh, this is someone else. Right? It must be someone else. I don't know. I must generate another session. Must be another cookie. Okay? Because both of these include credentials, these two queries, when I logged in, and then now that I'm fetching the current user, the server says, oh, it's the same session. Okay? So it's a user that just logged in. That's in the current user session, right? That's the one that's going to come back here on the client. And so once we do the fetch, we parse the user. We parse it from JSON. It comes back from the body, yes. And we return that from the current user. And then in the profile, we assign the user to a local variable current user. See that? Right? Which is right here. And then in the HTML, I'm just printing out the username of the current user. Right? So this might say, welcome whoever you logged in. Make sense? All right, so let's try it out. So on the client side, if I log in as Bob and I log in, it says welcome Bob. Right? If I go back and log in as Alice, it says welcome Alice. Right? So both of these queries are coming from the server. The client has no clue of any of this. Okay? It's none of this state is being maintained on the client side, and it shouldn't, especially authorization stuff. Okay? Things that we want to know who you really are. Right? All of that should live on the server side. Is everybody okay? All right. Awesome. All right. All right. So let's move on. Certainly, there's much more. Right? There's registration. There's other things that we can do. But before we spend some more time on user management, I'd like to talk a little bit about, if I log in, I'd like to be able to maybe join a course, right? Maybe register for a course or join a section. So let's play around a little bit with sections. Okay? I think that's a big part of the assignment as well. Working with sections, being able to enroll in a section. So let's play around a little bit with that.